If your children don't follow your rules, you can punish them. But what if someone else's kids don't? It can put parents in a tough spot.
Here with some help is Dr. Wesley Carter. She writes an advice column called Kids by Carter. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Dr. Carter. Thank you so much for being here. I love this topic because I think so many parents find themselves in these situations. Yes, when you have your kids' friends over to play, and it can be a delicate situation, can it not, when children are misbehaving at your home?
Absolutely. And it's a little uncomfortable because you've then got to have some maybe uncomfortable conversations with your friends, with their parents.
Right. Where do we start, though? First of all, if you do have kids over your house for a couple of hours, let's say they're playing with your kids and they are jumping on furniture, doing things that you don't allow in your home, you should speak up? How do you handle it?
You absolutely should speak up. Well, first, it's safety. So number one is making sure that the children are engaging in a safe manner. So if they're not being safe, that's really easy. That's the easiest one to manage, because then it's justifiable that you can then say to the child, well, Benji, this is not safe, and I feel more comfortable if you were playing in a safe way. That's easy. It gets harder, though, when it's just about the difference in rules, your values versus the values of their parents. That's when it gets a little more tricky. But that's a great teachable moment for your child to teach your child leadership, because remember, how you model that behavior has a lot to do with how your child is going to respond when they have values different than their friends. And I'm thinking of drugs and alcohol and perhaps engaging in other unhealthy activities. So it's really important that you pull your children aside and say, this is really uncomfortable. But
well, can you give us an example then of one of those situations where it might be a difference in values as opposed to a safety concern?
Yes. Well, one of the differences is bedtimes. Television time, families generally have very different rules about that. So if you've got a house guest and maybe their children get to stay up until midnight or later and your children have to be in bed at 9, that's going to be a big difference. So what you want to do is really focus on one thing, and that's shrinking the behavior. You cannot change the rules for someone else's child. But what you can say to your children is, hey, you know our bedtime here is 9. They don't really have a bedtime. We can't manage that, but what mommy can do is confine them to one room. So you talk to their parents and say, hey, we have bedtimes in our home. You don't. I don't have any any judgments about that. Right. But can we just confine them to one room and maybe have them watch television quietly so that your children understand that while I can't change their rules, notice they didn't have the run of the house.
Okay.
And it's probably hard sometimes not only to tell a child, you know, hey, don't do this, don't do that, but then if you have to deal with their parents making that call or going over and saying, hey, look, your kid's out of hand over here.
Well, and talking to their parents, it's just very important to be very sensitive. Parents really fear being judged. There's a lot of research on that.
Well, maybe you don't want to back them in the corner.
Yeah, it's very important. But you want to be able to have guests and for everybody to enjoy it. And if you don't have that conversation, you and I both know then it becomes very difficult and very uncomfortable. So better to be uncomfortable for a moment than for every visit.
That's true. So then at what point, though, do you have that conversation with parents? Like, I've had kids over who, maybe, you know, they eat different stuff than we do, or you know, like you said, TV time or video game time, and we have very strict limits on that. And I've had to tell kids, sorry, that's just not what we do in our house. I never mention it to the parents because I just don't. I mean, that's not a big deal, right?
You know, it's not a big deal, but some parents are really touchy about you speaking to their children, and some parents are very open, so you're going to have to gauge that. I find, though, if you talk in I call it a stage whisper, you know, here we don't do that. Generally, the parents will jump in and say, now, Jason, you know, they don't do that here.
Right.
And so if you speak up and you're not whispering, then generally the parents will step in. If they don't step in, I'm totally okay with saying, hey, we kind of don't do that here. And it becomes a little bit of a joke, because then those parents will tease you and say, well, that's right. These kids go to bed really early. But if you can withstand that and you say, yeah, we do, and not really argue that.
Sometimes we got a hot box we put the kids in sometimes if they get out of control.
Yes.
And they don't like it because the temperatures will get really hot in there. I'm just teasing. We don't have a hot box.
I was really getting ready to find out where you bought that.
You were nodding along with me pretty well.
Where did you buy that?
She's like, that sounds like an interesting tool.
Where do you get the hot box? At Sears. It's made by Craftsman.
I love that.
No hot box. No hot box.
You know, I think that when we... Seriously, though, when the guests leave is a great time for you to talk to your kids and say, this was really uncomfortable.
Yes.
I really had to step up and take some leadership. It's really uncomfortable, because children need to understand that we have some uncomfortable conversations as well.
Yes, we'll talk about you behind your backs when you leave my home. Thank you very much. Dr. Wesley Carter, Kids by Carter is the column. Thank you. We appreciate it.